This is PTV World. I am SYED SHABAHAT and you're watching Fault Lines. The war between Russia and Ukraine started in February 2022. Many thought this would be a short battle. There were many who were of the view that one of the sides would be able to pull the other one out of the war, but it did not happen. The entire West came to the rescue of Ukraine. They were provided ammunition, they were provided every possible military technology to knock out Russia, but it did not happen, and the war technically remained in a state of stalemate despite all the challenges that Russia has been facing. Then the entire Western bloc together, they didn't name themselves NATO, but they actually tried to do whatever could be done on the economic front as well. Russia stands to be third most sanctioned country today, followed by North Korea and Iran. But yet, Russian economy stayed strong, or at least it stayed afloat. Meanwhile, the recent war between Israel and Gaza became point of attention for the entire world media, and perhaps the international media lost focus of this very important war, which has caused more than 10,000 lives and millions of displacement in the heart of Europe. Let me remind you that this is the most serious escalation, the most violent conflict that Europe has seen since conclusion of World War II. To talk about this very pertinent issue, today I have invited Lucas Weber, who is co-founder and author of militantwire.com and frequently writes about the subject. Lucas Weber, I welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
What's the overall situation of Ukraine at the moment, because we have not seen any major developments on this issue so far?
Yes, well, after Ukraine launched its much vaunted counteroffensive starting in June, it was very hyped, and the objectives were to cut the land bridge that Russia has built in the south to Crimea. However, Ukraine's actual performance was very underwhelming, and they only made marginal gains on each axis of attack, and eventually the counteroffensive petered out and ended in total failure. And since then, the Russians have again regained the initiative, and they are now making local breakthroughs all across the line, from Zaporozhye to Donetsk to Luhansk and up towards Kharkiv. So at the moment, Russia has the initiative, and they are making gains across a broad swath of the front.
So Russia is making gains again. This means technically the war is not in a state of stalemate as it used to be last time when we spoke about it. And also this must be a very horrifying scenario for Ukraine.
Yes, well, Ukraine, their military is essentially running on fumes at the moment, because the cutback in American aid to Ukraine, for instance, has deprived them of the ability to build back up their stockpiles, which were burnt up, really depleted during the summer offensive, which is very resource intensive, and now they call it active defense, and this is because Russia has regained the initiative. Ukraine is looking to kind of pull back in some areas and establish defensive lines in more suitable locations. And essentially, Ukraine needs American aid, because America is the top military aid provider to Ukraine. And without this, we were really seeing local collapses in Ukraine's defense lines, and they're outmatched quite significantly in areas like artillery and even manpower overall. They're struggling to recruit more people to replace those lost during the counteroffensive and the aftermath when Russia regained the initiative.
Now, as you're talking about Russia's offenses, tell us about the city of Avdiivka, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly or not, But the city of Avdiivka has been discussed a lot in all the international media outlets to be strategically a very significant place for Russia. Why is it so significant? Can you tell us something about its geography and its strategic significance in this battle?
Yes, well, it is a main linchpin of Ukraine's defense in the Donbass. And it goes beyond this because Avdiivka has been a battlefront since the separatist rebellion, armed rebellion in the mid 2010s. And so there's been harsh, brutal fighting going on there well beyond the invasion. And for Ukraine, they need to hold this line because, like Bakhmut, it would open the door, open the gate for Russia to continue pushing west. And this is particularly, Russia would like to take Seversk and Avdiivka so that they can move on to Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which is the next major defensive line. So, and also for the Russians, it's politically important because for them, the shelling of the Donbass or of Donetsk city is a major issue, and it was also given as one of the justifications for conducting the invasion, or what Russia calls a special military operation. And so most of the shelling has come from Ukraine's Avdiivka position. So taking this would be both a strategic victory in terms of what moving towards territory they wish to conquer in the future, and it's also a political victory in stopping the shelling of civilian populations in Donetsk city.
Mr. Weber, tell us about the United States. There was a debate in the US Congress about providing more money, providing more funds for the Ukraine cause, and at the same time there was a discussion going on to provide more financial support to Israel. And I don't know what happened as an outcome of it, but it was sure that there is at least a distraction in the US's politics, which apparently was diluting the significance of Ukraine. So what is happening now? Is it an outcome of the diluted US's interest or its financing for Ukraine?
It is definitely a factor. These are definitely factors. So the Republican Party is negotiating with the Democrats, and they're using Ukraine funding as leverage to essentially strengthen their position to be able to pass legislation and policy to strengthen the U.S.'s southern border, which there is a illegal immigration crisis of a very significant momentum going on right now. So the Republicans want a very hardline policy on the border in exchange for the Democrats getting aid to Ukraine. And another factor in this is that Donald Trump is now de facto, or essentially he's ostensibly going to win the Republican nomination. And this has an impact on Republican policy right now, even though he's not in power. So Republicans know that they want to build favor with Trump and move in a Trumpian position. And Trump has been quite clear that he wants to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. So they're kind of using this Republican support for Trump about ending the war in Ukraine to hold up Ukraine aid. And yes, the conflict in Israel has kind of received priority because they've been receiving large amounts of military aid from the U.S. since October 7th, and before that, of course, but an increased amount. And this is cutting into the stocks, artillery, and other important fundamental things that Ukraine needs desperately. And so we are seeing the impacts on the field of Ukrainian military aid being either deprioritized or essentially it being cut into by Israeli military aid.
And Ukraine has been meanwhile floating idea of launching a fresh offensive against Russia. I'm not sure if they are capable of re-recruiting altogether? Because when you talk about offenses, this takes a lot more of resources, including manpower, including trained manpower. You cannot just be recruiting kids from the college or schools and sending them on the military front like Russia tried more than a couple of times. So what do you think? Are what Ukrainians saying and what the Americans believing, are they on two different pages now?
Yes, well, if we look back to the much hyped Ukrainian counteroffensive in the summer, Ukraine threw their many of their best units into essentially a brick wall, a killing field of Russian defenses and pre-prepared firing positions, ATGM attacks, attacks by helicopters and airstrikes, and they had to go through minefields. So there were absolutely devastating losses, and a lot of these units, which are Ukraine's top units, were trained by NATO, and they were completely rendered combat ineffective, or they were essentially, they took so many losses that they are much weaker. And it's very hard to regenerate forces of this quality that they used for their first offensive, which failed. So if they're going to, and first of all, they have to receive the kind of military aid to the level or more that they used during the failed offensive in order to have the ability to succeed even marginally. And there's not really any reason to think that the new offensive would be any different, considering that Russia has only hardened its lines, militarized its economy, its military industrial base. It's been recruiting at a high level. It doesn't have any manpower problems. They're producing artillery at an astounding rate and getting supplemented artillery from North Korea. So it's not looking good for the Ukrainians, and I don't even know if the Western countries, the U.S. in particular, have the stockpiles to build up another Ukrainian offensive cache, or if they have the will, given the new Israel war that's received prioritization, not just by the governments, but by the media. You rarely see Ukraine on the front page anymore. It's all about the Red Sea and Israel and Hamas and the Houthis. So, and this has an impact on policymakers because they watch the news just like anyone else. So I think it's going to be very hard to build up a force even close to what they built up for their failed summer offensive.
Mr. Weber, meanwhile, there have been signals from Putin's side that he wants to negotiate, he wants to end this war, and perhaps he wants to come back on the negotiation table, which he had refused in the past. Now, how seriously has this been taken by the West? Because as I comprehend from your analysis, the US's interest in financing this war is also declining, and so is the entire West, because the West normally, I mean, the European countries normally follow the American policy with regards to international conflicts. So how seriously has that been taken, and do you believe this is a good option to give diplomacy a chance?
Well, I don't think we should make too much of it because Putin has signaled this throughout the whole war. It's just that he is ready to settle on his own terms. And I don't think the West or especially Ukraine will settle with the status quo plus the excess demands that Russia will demand, essentially. And there's a major gap between the two parties in what they will accept. And Russia is now increasingly gaining the advantage as Ukraine's manpower, it doesn't have any domestic industry and has to rely almost completely on the West. NATO is still saying they want Ukraine in NATO, and I think that's a red line for Vladimir Putin, which he won't allow because that was one of the primary reasons he started this war. And now that they're in it, I think they want to go all the way and achieve their maximalist objectives. Now, it remains to be seen if they can actually do this, but I believe that they will gain much more territory than they're holding now.
So, out of what you have told me so far, do you believe that this puts Putin on a position of advantage, or does it hurt him politically, as he's also existing in a political setup, rightly or wrongly, but it's a democracy, it's a country that holds elections where the support of the people is very important, at least theoretically speaking?
Well, what truly matters is that the Russian political elite are almost entirely on the same page when it comes to Ukraine as a red line issue. And, the new CIA leader, William Burns, he sent a cable, I believe it was in 2008, saying he spoke to everyone in the Kremlin from the top to the bottom, and every single one of them saw Ukraine as an existential issue. So I don't believe that essentially elites make policies, and that's just how it is. So when the elite the Russian elite in particular, are united on this, I don't really see him facing any significant pressure that would put him at risk.
So Russia is not losing anything out of it, at least politically speaking. They're not losing anything out of it. The United States and the West will not be entrusted in negotiating it in position of a status quo, keeping Russia on a position of strength. Then tell me how the United States would want to continue with the conflict that they have between Russia and Ukraine, particularly with US's increasing focus on creating more problems around China. And this we see very consistently coming out of the US's policy. Their shift is entirely toward China now. So how would the United States be able to concentrate if its support for Israel is not diluting, if it's not reaching a conclusion on Ukraine's issue, and meanwhile it wants to stress further on the tensions that it's building up with China?
Yes, well, one possibility, and I don't really place much stock in this, is that Biden may be waiting until he is possibly reelected in order to bring the Ukraine war to a close. And yes, the pivot to Asia is, it's been around, the idea of it and has been around for years, but there is some split because there's a lot of neocon hawks in the establishment that have deep grievances against Russia, Cold War types, neocons, these types of people in both parties. And I think that the war in Ukraine essentially is a drag on the US's ability to pivot to China, which is by far more of a threat to the US from their perspective than Russia is. And at some point, they're going to have to make that pivot. And there's already people dissenting from the current policy with Ukraine and Israel, and saying that we must pivot to China because time is running out, and we need a strategy of containment before they start to expand their regional sphere of power.
Thank you very much, Lucas Weber, for being guest in our show today.
Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Lucas Weber, and he had a wonderful analysis. But the point where we ended this conversation is that Russia is thought to be an enemy that United States is trying to curtail because it wants to eventually focus on China. It has to make sure that Russia is being made an example. But suppose if China decides to put pressure on the United States by providing more support to Russia, it might become a horrifying scenario for the US. We'll take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us.
पाकिस्तान जिंदाबाद 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 जिंदाबाद।
Welcome back. Let's talk about in this second segment of the program about one of the major social issues that Pakistani society is facing at large, and this is the issue of child marriages in Pakistan. UNICEF has shared some official statistics according to which 21% of Pakistani girls are married before reaching the age of 18. 3% of the girls are married before reaching the age of 15. And this makes Pakistan a country with sixth highest number of girls getting married before the age of 18. What happens as a consequence is an entire vicious circle of miseries and crisis. A girl child who is not educated enough, who is not mature enough, cannot be provided with enough opportunities. And this has consequences on the society, on the economy, and on the opportunities that could have been extended to these girl children. More importantly, most of these issues are deeply graved or deeply rooted in the very fabric of the rural society, which normally even give these girls away as a penalty to the aggrieved family in order to settle disputes. To talk about this very pertinent issue in Pakistan, I have today invited Dr. Sana Darwish. Dr. Sana Darwish, who is joining me from Lahore on Skype, is a leading expert in primary health program management with a focus on reproductive rights, child marriage prevention, and gender sensitive health. Dr. Sana Darwish, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for choosing this very important topic.
Now, this was a perspective that I have as a layman because I'm not an expert on these social issues. But as an expert on the subject, why are you concerned about child marriages being one of the major social issues in the country? Why do you think it to be a major social issue for Pakistan?
So, like you said, Pakistan is number 6 when contributing to child marriages in the world. We are the 5th most populous country in the world. So that means we are a large population. And if 20% of our girls are married before the age of 18, it means that we are making families that are being raised by young people, very young people who are not prepared to take that role. That again means that they will not be planning their life. Someone else will be doing that for them, which brings us to the fact that, we see a lot of health issues, health crises in Pakistan, education crisis in Pakistan. We see a lot of development issues in Pakistan. We are lagging behind in most of our sustainable development goals. And, when we look at the root causes of all these lackings in the development, we see that it is because, our young people were not prepared to take on the role that they were given. and that is resulting in very large families that are not getting enough mental health, physical health, social health to carry on with their life. That puts a lot of burden on the health system, education system, and the government system. And we do have disease ministries. We have all sorts of programs that respond to crisis, but we're not planning the well-being of our nation. And that is why one of the key issues that have to be tackled by any coming government or any other development program has to be a focus on protection of children from early marriages.
Dr. Sena, as we have discussed earlier, it is 21 out of 100 girls that are married before the age of 18. That makes it 1 out of 5. Now, 1 out of 5 is a very high ratio. And this apparently doesn't seem to be a phenomena centered around some areas of the country. So do you have any statistics to identify what are the hotbed areas for this problem? This problem must be prevalent more in some areas, and some areas might not see the intensity of it.
You're right. See, when we are very aware that rural areas and people living under the poverty line sometimes have no other choice than to marry off their young girls, because otherwise the girls are not contributing in the economy of the family, or if we look at the larger picture in the country, they're being denied the right to access education or an employment. So the only thing that is left with the family is to have them married. Now, it is very common in the rural areas. Ironically, when the Sindh has the largest, has the strongest legislation, the largest contribution in early child marriages is coming from Sindh and rural areas of Sindh. So we have to look at those pockets, the rural areas of Sindh that are contributing. Number two is Punjab, and then and in areas where poverty and access to employment and life opportunities is less. So those are the fixed areas. We can go to district-wise data. It is all available. But the problem actually really is that not all births are registered in Pakistan. In fact, not registering births is a very huge issue. So whatever statistics we get is mostly through surveys like DHS, etc., which are also very on a sample base. Child marriages are not reported because it is taken as an internal matter. So unless state takes enough proactive measures to know the burden of the problem and to address them, because it can also happen in urban areas, and I've seen that happening when I was in Karachi. It was very common in urban and peri-urban areas. So we have to have proper data being reported to take actions. But for now, I think whatever is available, the district-wise data is available on child marriages. For example, Tharparkar in Sindh is a hotbed. So that kind of data will help us design programs which are very focused and targeted on communities. The problem is we do have some very strong legislations, for example, in Sindh, but people do not know of them. Children do not know, parents do not know, and communities do not know. So legislation and working with communities in these targeted populations is going to be very important.
And also the lack of law enforcement must be one of the major reasons, because as Sindh has already made a legislation, you have already pointed it out, that in Sindh officially a marriage cannot take place if the child is not, if the girl is not more than, or the boy is not more than 18 years of age. And if still is Sindh is number one on your list, this means there is a problem with law enforcement mechanism as well. Why do you think law enforcement has not been able to enforce the writ?
I do give communities and society a chance after legislation is made. There has to be a very focused attention on making the public aware of the existence of such a legislation. So I think I would give them, the communities and our law enforcement agencies, a benefit of doubt that they have not yet been educated enough. And so I would say we have to focus on communities' education and awareness, including of the children, that they have the certain rights that they can exercise, of the parents, of community leaders, and then also coming on to our law enforcement agencies, our police force, etc. We do have child protection committees now in certain districts which are doing well. I was in Hyderabad and there were cases being responded to and stopped at the right time. But it is literally in Karachi and Hyderabad, for example, if you talk about Sindh. But we have to go into further districts and educate more and have these protection mechanisms under one roof, where reporting is made easier for communities, where if there's a punishment that has to happen, that has to be also made easier. What we also see, there are gaps in laws. For example, in Sindh it's 18 years, but in Punjab it's 16 years for both the genders. But in other areas there is an age gap. For girls it's 16 and for boys it's 18. So that discrimination has to go away. Reporting has to be made easier, and if there has to be a consequence, that consequence has to happen. Because if until unless we model the implementation of the law and it is made public, we cannot have enough results from making any legislations.
Dr. Sinha, we are quite close to elections now. Pakistan is about to witness another general elections in February. Do you find this to be in the mainstream discourse of the political parties that are about to contend election and going to ask people for their all-out support? And if not, why do you believe this is missing from the horizon?
Yeah, so not really. Right now, all the politics is around, you're talking about economy and you're talking about foreign policy, etc., which is great. Those are important issues. But when you're talking about social issues, I find that conversation completely missing, the plans completely missing. And I think one of the reasons for that is there is no understanding of the link between these social issues and your economy and social security. For example, with such a huge young population which is facing challenges of gender inequalities, girls being married earlier, it is affecting girls disproportionately. So you are adding to the hunger, to the crime, to the law and order, because even young boys cannot take the responsibility of the family. So we are not able to connect the dots between these social issues and the social security issues that will arise, and then general security issues that will arise, and the economy. So that kind of education and of the politicians is also very important. A very good example was set when one of the former chief justices took a suo motu on family planning. That kind of awareness and that kind of proactivity is needed in all social issues, particularly when it comes to protecting our children. Because really, when we say we are getting a child married, we are outrightly, with a lot of audacity, denying the children the right to education, to play, to stay with security, to stay in, to contribute to development, etc. So these are not minor issues. These are going to become huge economic issues in future, and that kind of understanding is currently lacking.
My last question, Dr. Sinha. We have so far spoken about the laws being fluid and fragile, about the society not capable of understanding the consequences or gravity of the situation, about the polity that widely remains unsensitized or about this issue, and also about the lack of attention of the administrative apparatus of the state being unable to enforce the laws that have already been made, while the laws that have been made are not sufficient. Where ideally should we be starting it from? What can be the first step for any upcoming political party that is going to take a lead in implementing a better policy for favorable for the girls? Where do you think should be the first point?
I think, like Sindh, we should have more progressive laws in other provinces. We should raise the age of marriage to at least 18. I would have loved to set 21, but 18. That would require, and there is a lot of misunderstanding. The federal Sharia code says there is no harm in, there is nothing un-Islamic about having set an age of marriage. So I think all the provinces should be on one page, that the age of marriage for both boys and girls should be 18, not less than 18. And then we have to also legislate in favor of pre-marriage counseling of couples so that they're equipped when planning a family and running a family. They are going to make the whole fabric of the society and take us forward. So legislation is one, and then and on implementation side, large scale education programs, why can't we make it a part of curriculum to be for children to be aware of their rights, and for out of school children to be made aware of their rights, and for parents to know their rights. So a large scale state sponsored behavior change communication campaigns targeted in areas where the problem is really rampant, not going all firing cylinders, but very targeted approach. And then for also making sure that whoever is denying the rights and not working with the legislation that is already done faces consequences. We cannot take laws lightly. We are signatories to international law. We have our local laws. We cannot make fun of them like that. To have the laws and not hold people accountable. So that has to be really made sure.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sana Darvesh, for being guest in our show.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Dr. Sana Darvesh, and if I conclude whatever she has said in this 15 or 18 minutes of conversation, the first step is the implementation of the laws that have already been made, while there is a need of making more laws that can perhaps bring a harmony or can bring a uniformity across the country in the laws prevalent at the moment. Also, we have to be fully aware of the fact that every child, regardless of his or her gender, needs to be extended equal opportunities. Unless we do not do justice, starting from our homes, the society will never have justice at large. We'll join you next week with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.